This is the 70th anniversary of the Australian Institute of International Affairs here in Western Australia. And its founder was one of our most distinguished academics, a man actually well ahead of his time, in Fred Alexander. Fred Alexander was pretty well known to my dad, because Dad worked with him when Dad was a tutor organiser for adult education. And as such, Dad used to do foreign policy broadcasts and all that sort of thing over the radio stations of the day. But Fred Alexander was the doyen of all of this. And he was a public intellectual in Western Australia, and the Institute was his vehicle.
Fred Alexander had forward-thinking views on Australia's international alliances. What were those?
The thing that interested me about Fred Alexander as I approached the chat that I'm going to give on the Institute and its foundation and talk a bit about the United States alliance, Fred was way ahead of the way in which Australians of the day thought about the United States. He produced a book well in advance of any systematic thinking in Australia about the American relationship, saying it was time that Australia thought that way. What was revolutionary about this? Well, Fred's views were revolutionary because the denizens of the British Empire, which most of our political leadership were at the time, and beyond the political leadership to the broad public generally, the significance of the imperial defence system was such that American anti-colonial ideas were not welcome. We could see that the Japanese were potentially threatening in the region which we inhabited. We'd seen that for a long time, and we'd been resentful when the British effectively outsourced the defence of their Eastern Empire to the Japanese in the early 1900s. There had always been a worry in Australia. But having said that, there was still total confidence in the United Kingdom, and the United States did not seem to have helpful attitudes. And there was a feeling that that pushing yourself close to the US, engaging them in a conversation, might in some way diminish the significance of what was our important connection.
This is what you're going to be saying in the lecture that you're giving to celebrate the 70th anniversary, is it?
I'm actually going to talk a little bit about that, but not a huge heck of a lot. I'm going to talk about that in terms of origins and in terms of Fred. But I want to really talk about the contemporary alliance. And that's what I will be doing in the bulk of the lecture.
Right.
But it needs an opening paragraph, I suspect, and that is, or opening paragraph or two, and that is where I'm going to talk about Fred's view at that point, because there's beyond the historical interest, there's not really a total association between where Fred saw things and where things subsequently developed. We've moved a long way down the track since Fred had sway in the affairs of the Institute of International Affairs and in the minds of West Australians. We were a very small state when Fred began the Institute of International Affairs. It's hard to think of it now because Western Australia now is a powerful entity within the Commonwealth of Australia. We generate, and have for some time, though may not in the future, we generate the bulk of our international economic performance in the area of trade, and a fair bit of it in the area of investment as well. And so we're vital. It's hard to remember back the days of West Australian dependency.
And when Western Australia decided it didn't want to join the Federation.
West Australia initially was very reluctant to join, or at least John Forrest, who subsequently became an Australian Defence Minister, was very reluctant to join the Australian Federation. And he was effectively forced to by the political strength of the goldfields, which he gerrymandered out of the West Australian Parliament. But when you, if you look at what would be a referendum, though, a referendum of the whole people, gerrymandered boundaries didn't count for much because it was a statewide vote. And the goldfields, by and large, outweighed the Perth metropolitan area. So there was an instant commitment to feminism on John Forrest's part, because the gender balance in Perth was 50-50. The gender balance on the goldfields would have been about 90-10. So
there was domestic interest.
John Forrest did sincerely hope that the women of Perth would outweigh the rough men of the goldfields, but didn't quite work.
Yeah, well, things have changed a bit. That maybe they have, maybe they haven't. Can I just ask you quickly, in terms of the importance of civil society in Australian international relations? I mean, should the management of international relations be left to the professionals like you?
I'm not a professional. I am a journeyman when it comes to operating in the Department of Foreign Affairs, and I know that better now than I did when I went to the United States. We are blessed with a really effective foreign affairs and a trade department. It's in the extent to which it is not as effective as it should be has been a reflection of, or an outcome of, the way in which it's been pulverised by successive governments over the years. But they actually do know how to handle themselves globally, and they do it extremely well. But foreign policy is nothing without community ballast. In the end, what you reflect overseas is what your people are prepared to tolerate you to reflect. And if they don't like the direction of your foreign policy gets very quickly wrecked. So there's consensus building that's necessary with civil society at several different levels. The most basic level is that you actually have a creative international outlook. That is a very general proposition, but it is one that you want settled in the public mind. We ought to be interested in affairs outside ourselves, and you can funnel down from that to the specific. The most extreme case of which is when you're at war, as we are now in the Middle East. Then you actually really need a detailed consensus, if you like, or a detailed understanding of why you're doing what you're doing. And again, this can't be delivered by the professional department. It's not their role. The moment they were to try to do this, they'd immediately enter political controversy, which would wreck them anyway. So it has to be done by somebody else. Now, the Institute for International Affairs has been a marvellous mechanism for foreign policy specialists in their post-departmental life. If you go around and look at the branches of the Institute of International Affairs, it is chock full of foreign affairs, ex-foreign affairs and trade officials, some defence officials as well. And it's terrific because it reflects the fact that they really feel that there is something that has to be conveyed to the average Aussie about what it is that they were doing. Now, they obviously want a conversation, and they can get a conversation out of various specialists who present to meetings of the Institute in the various states. But they also want to shape the conversation.
Well, you know, in that connection, the branch here, West Australia's version of the Institute, more than about 50% of our members are now under 35. So I think there's also a yearning for guidance and information and mentoring in the younger group in our community.
A weird thing is happening in the academic life of our society, and we are not alone. When I was in the United States, I often spoke to branches of the World Affairs Council. In many ways, the World Affairs Council in the United States has structures that are not dissimilar from the Institute of International Affairs. It's not as well developed as the Australian Institute of International Affairs, but it has similarities. And it's the old and the young. The middle-aged tend to have disappeared from the equation. But youngsters now feel the need for forums for a discussion of foreign policy. When I was before I was in Parliament, I used to teach politics at Murdoch University. Then those who studied politics studied basically political institutions, political parties, political theories, a sort of tail-end Charlie. of the course in international relations, of the course in politics was international relations, and the tail end Charlie has subsumed the main beast. Now kids do politics to do international relations. So whereas, say, when I did it, maybe 10% of people who were political students had as their major interest international relations, that would now be about 70 or 80%. So particularly as the BA has usually become a precursor to the law degree or the economics degree, the international relations component of it has become important. There are a lot of kids who are doing international relations and want a forum outside the academic community to express themselves.
Kim, thank you.
Good.
US, yeah, go on.
Yeah, I'm at the Perth US Asia Studies Centre at the moment, and what's fascinating to me is I call them the submarine. There are about half a dozen young academics, maybe one or two more, who sit either side of this. They're benched alongside each other, and there's a sort of screen between them and the others on the other side, but they look as though they're shaped like a submarine. And one of them happens to be the chairperson of the Institute of International Affairs in Canberra, and all of them, those academics, are engaged with the Institute of International Affairs somehow. And it's just a reflection that it's now a normal part of the CV of somebody who is engaged in foreign policy study in Australia, that they should be a member of the Institute.
Well, our membership is very strong and growing, and that's very encouraging. Because, when I took over the branch, which was about 12 years ago now, the membership was almost totally over 65.